The CEO's parrot won't stop repeating the secret romantic things he says in his sleep to the new assistant they're about to. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what's the funniest thing a pet has ever done? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy. Jennifer Hughes's first day as the executive assistant to Vaughn Ashford was less of an orientation and more of a trial by fire, or, more accurately, a trial by feather. "And this," said Arthur, the outgoing assistant who looked like he had aged a decade in the last 6 months, "is the most critical part of your job." He gestured not to the complex scheduling software or the multi-line phone system, but to a large, ornate cage in the corner of the sprawling penthouse office. Inside the cage sat the most majestic, most intimidating parrot Jennifer had ever seen. It was a hyacinth macaw, a stunning creature of deep cobalt blue with bright yellow rings around its eyes. It was also currently glaring at her as if she were a hostile takeover bid. "That's a parrot," Jennifer stated, her voice a little weak. The job description had mentioned light office management and scheduling. It had not mentioned a large, predatory-looking bird. "That is not a parrot," Arthur corrected, his voice a low, serious whisper. "That is Sir Reginald, and he is your new boss, your real boss." "My boss is Mr. Ashford," Jennifer said, confused. Arthur let out a short, humorless laugh. "Mr. Ashford is the CEO. Sir Reginald runs the office. He has opinions on everything. Your primary function is to keep him content." "Content? Happy," Arthur clarified. "He likes organic mango slices, Bach sonatas, and having his head scratched, but only on Tuesdays. And for goodness sake, whatever you do, do not wear yellow. He considers it a personal affront." Jennifer stared at the bird. The bird stared back, then let out a loud, imperious squawk that sounded suspiciously like the word incompetent. "Right," Jennifer said, her confidence wavering. "No yellow. Got it." Just then, the doors to the office swept open, and Vaughn Ashford strode in. He was exactly as the legends described. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a restless energy that made the air around him seem to crackle. He didn't walk. He moved like a storm front. "Arthur, the quarterly reports," he barked, not even glancing at Jennifer. "Do we have the final numbers from the Tokyo division?" "On your desk, sir," Arthur said, immediately snapping to attention. Vaughn stopped at his massive desk, his eyes scanning a document. "This is unacceptable. The profit margin is down 0.2%. Get Tokyo on the line, now." He finally looked up, his gaze falling on Jennifer as if he were just noticing a new piece of furniture. "And you are?" "Jennifer Hughes, sir," she said, standing a little straighter. "Your new assistant." "Right," he said, his attention already back on the report. "Don't mess up." It was the most intimidating job interview of her life, and it had happened after she was already hired. "Well," Arthur said, grabbing his box of personal belongings. "That's my cue. Good luck, Jennifer. You're going to need it." He scurried out of the office like a man escaping a burning building. Jennifer was left alone in the vast, silent office with a billionaire who communicated in grunts and a parrot who seemed to be plotting her demise. She took a deep breath. She could do this. She had handled worse. She had once worked for a fashion designer who only ate white food. A grumpy bird and a grumpier CEO were manageable. For the first few hours it was quiet. Vaughn was a whirlwind of focused energy, taking calls, firing off emails, and making multi-million-dollar decisions with a terrifying speed. Jennifer just tried to stay out of his way, organizing his schedule and trying to figure out the ridiculously complex coffee machine. It was during a moment of rare silence, while Vaughn was deep in a conference call, that the parrot spoke. Jennifer was refilling the bird's water dish when he sidled up to the bars of his cage, tilting his head. "Her eyes," Sir Reginald squawked, his voice a perfect, gravelly imitation of Vaughn's. "Like honey." Jennifer froze, her hand hovering over the water dish. She looked at the parrot, then at Vaughn, who was still on his call, completely oblivious. Did you just say something?" she whispered to the bird. The parrot just blinked its intelligent, black eyes. She must have imagined it. The stress of the new job was clearly getting to her. She went back to her desk. A few minutes later, Vaughn finished his call and stood up, stretching. He walked over to the cage, a rare, soft expression on his face. "Did you behave for the new girl, Reggie?" he murmured, scratching the bird's head. "Don't call me Reggie," the parrot grumbled in Vaughn's voice. Vaughn just smiled, a small, sad, private smile that completely transformed his face. For a second, he wasn't the Ice King. He was just a man who loved his bird. He turned to Jennifer. "I'm heading into a meeting. I need the preliminary data on the Sterling acquisition and make sure Reggie gets his afternoon mango. He gets moody without it." He swept out of the office, leaving Jennifer alone with the feathered tyrant. She carefully sliced a piece of organic mango and offered it to the bird. Sir Reginald took the mango, chewed it thoughtfully, and then looked her right in the eye. "Such a smile," he squawked once again in Vaughn's voice, a low, sleepy murmur this time. "Lights up the whole dreary room." Jennifer dropped the rest of the mango. This time, she knew she hadn't imagined it. The parrot was talking, and it was quoting someone. It was quoting Vaughn. A cold, thrilling dread washed over her. She looked at the parrot, who was now preening as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of her first day. "Who?" she whispered. "Who are you talking about?" The parrot just let out a shrill whistle. For the rest of the day, Jennifer was on high alert. She tried to work, but her ears were trained on the cage. The bird was a feathered tape recorder, and she was starting to suspect he had a secret playlist. The final confirmation came at the end of the day. Vaughn was packing his briefcase, a weary look on his face. "Good work today, Miss Hughes," he said, a rare, almost imperceptible compliment. "You didn't burn the place down. You're already ahead of the last one." "Thank you, sir," she said, her heart doing a little flip. As he walked to the door, he paused and looked back. Not at her, but at the cage. "Good night, Reggie." "Good night, my lonely king," the parrot squawked, its voice a perfect imitation of a soft, feminine, and vaguely familiar voice. Vaughn froze, a dark blush creeping up his neck. He shot Jennifer a panicked look. She pretended to be deeply engrossed in shutting down her computer. He practically fled the office, the door shutting a little too quickly behind him. Jennifer sat in the silent, darkening office, her mind racing. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and utterly, ridiculously hilarious. Vaughn Ashford, the ruthless billionaire, the Ice King of New York, was talking in his sleep. He was saying sweet, romantic, poetic things, and his parrot, his feathered blue confidant, was memorizing every single word. But who was he talking about? Her eyes like honey, such a smile. Jennifer walked over to the mirror by the door, pretending to check her hair. She looked at her own reflection. She had a nice smile, she supposed, and her eyes were a warm, honey brown. "Oh my goodness," she whispered to her reflection. "No. It couldn't be." She looked at Sir Reginald, who was watching her with an unnervingly intelligent gaze. "It's me, isn't it?" she whispered to the bird. "He's talking about me." The parrot just puffed up its chest and let out a long, dramatic, and very familiar-sounding sigh. It was the exact same sigh Vaughn had made after his disastrous call with the Tokyo office. Jennifer leaned against the wall, a hand pressed to her racing heart. She was the executive assistant to a man who was secretly, unconsciously, and poetically in love with her. And the only other person in the world who knew was a parrot. A very sarcastic, very judgmental, and very, very talkative parrot. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. Her last job had been boring. This one, she decided, was going to be a lot more fun. The next morning, Jennifer walked into the penthouse office with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was a secret agent, a spy. And her target was a grumpy billionaire. Her primary informant was a parrot. "Good morning, Sir Reginald," she chirped, walking over to the cage. "Did we have pleasant dreams?" The parrot narrowed its eyes and let out a squawk that sounded suspiciously like a classified. Vaughn was already at his desk, a storm cloud of focused energy. He didn't look up. Hughes, coffee, black, and the revised budget proposals from the Singapore office. "Now, good morning to you too, Mr. Sunshine," she muttered under her breath. "One black coffee and a side of existential dread. Coming right up." She went to the ridiculously complex espresso machine, a sleek silver beast that looked like it could launch a satellite. This was her first test. Yesterday, she'd been terrified of it. Today, she saw it as an opportunity. She deliberately bypassed the instruction manual she had studied the night before. "Darn it," she said loudly, after a moment of fiddling. This thing is confusing. Vaughn let out an exasperated sigh, not looking up from his work. It's a simple pressurized steam system, Hughes, not quantum physics. The instructions are on the counter. Right, but I'm more of a hands-on learner, she said, pressing a random sequence of buttons. The machine whirred, hissed, and then shot a jet of hot steam sideways, narrowly missing a priceless-looking abstract painting. Good grief, Vaughn exclaimed, finally jumping up from his desk. He strode over, looking at the machine with utter disdain. What did you do? I was trying to achieve optimal bean-to-water ratio, she said, using his own corporate jargon against him. The interface is not intuitive. He pushed her aside. Give me that. It's a simple matter of... He paused, staring at the array of buttons and dials. He, a man who could read a 50-page financial report in 5 minutes, had no idea how to operate his own coffee machine. He had always had an assistant to do it for him. He cleared his throat and pressed a button with a picture of a coffee bean on it. The machine made a horrible grinding noise, then went completely silent. A single, sad-looking coffee bean dropped into the empty cup. They both stared at the lonely bean. Her laugh? Sir Reginald suddenly squawked from his cage, his voice a perfect, sleepy imitation of Vaughn's murmur. It's like a spreadsheet finally balancing. Perfect. Vaughn froze. He slowly turned his head to look at the parrot, then at Jennifer. A dark blush crept up his neck. Jennifer pretended to be fascinated by the single coffee bean. What on earth was that? Vaughn asked, his voice a low, strangled sound. I think your bird just complimented my laugh, Jennifer said, trying to sound casual, though her heart was doing the cha-cha. And compared it to a spreadsheet? That's the weirdest, most specific compliment I have ever received. Is malfunctioning, Vaughn stammered, walking over to the cage. Bad mango, probably. Reggie, that's enough. Don't call me Reggie, the parrot grumbled, then turned its back on him. Vaughn looked mortified. He marched back to the coffee machine, now a man on a mission. He jabbed another button. This time the machine sputtered to life and began dispensing a dark, sludgy liquid that looked like motor oil. There, he said, a note of triumph in his voice. Coffee. He handed her the cup. It smelled like burnt plastic. Thank you, she said, accepting the cup with the solemnity of a soldier receiving a medal. You're a lifesaver. She took the cup to her desk and discreetly poured the contents into a potted plant. She had a feeling the ficus was not going to survive the week. The incident broke the ice. Vaughn, having been thoroughly humbled by a kitchen appliance, was slightly less intimidating. He still barked orders, but now there was a flicker of something else in his eyes when he looked at her. A hesitant, confused curiosity. He was watching her. She could feel his gaze on her as she worked. He wasn't just watching her file papers or answer phones, he was studying her. He'd catch her smiling at a funny email, and his brow would furrow in concentration, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. The parrot, for its part, had become her co-conspirator. Sir Reginald seemed to have decided that Jennifer was his chosen audience. He'd drop his little truth bombs at the most inopportune moments. One afternoon, Vaughn was on a brutal conference call with a rival company, his voice cold as ice. Your offer is an insult, Peterson. We wouldn't sell you our paperclips for that price, let alone our entire European division. In the middle of his tirade, Sir Reginald let out a soft, dreamy sigh. So clever, he squawked in Vaughn's sleepy voice. She just fixes things. My beautiful, brilliant fixer-upper. Vaughn choked mid-sentence. On the other end of the line, Peterson asked, Did you just call me a fixer-upper, Ashford? No, Vaughn barked, glaring at the parrot. I was agreeing with my financial advisor. He slammed the phone down, ending the call. He marched over to the cage. One more word out of you, bird, and you're eating generic brand crackers for a month. Sir Reginald just whistled innocently. Jennifer hid her smile behind her computer monitor, a fixer-upper. He thought she fixed things. The man who had a Japanese robot to wash his dishes thought she was the one who fixed things. The irony was delicious. She decided to push her luck. Later that day, Vaughn was wrestling with a problem. It was a marketing presentation for a new line of athletic wear. The campaign was stale, boring, and utterly uninspired. This is garbage, Arthur, he'd said to his former assistant over the phone earlier. It has no soul. It feels like it was designed by a committee of beige accountants. Now he was staring at the presentation, a look of pure frustration on his face. Jennifer walked over, holding a file. "The logistics report you asked for, sir." She placed it on his desk, but her eyes flickered to the screen. "Stuck?" "It's this new campaign," he grumbled, more to himself than to her. "It's inefficient. It lacks a core narrative." "What's the story?" she asked simply. He looked up at her. "What?" "The brand," she said. "What's its story? Who is it for? Not the demographic, the person." "What does she want?" He stared at her, stumped. "She wants athletic wear." "No," Jennifer said, a confident smile on her face. "She wants to feel strong. She wants to feel capable. She wants to know that she can be a work in progress and a masterpiece at the same time." She tapped the screen. "Your campaign is selling clothes. You should be selling courage." Vaughn just looked at her, his mind reeling. In 30 seconds, she had just diagnosed and solved a problem his entire marketing team had been failing at for 6 weeks. She saw the soul. She was a translator. "My word," he whispered, looking at her with a new, profound respect. You're good." "I'm an assistant, Mr. Ashford," she said, her smile widening. "I assist, and your campaign is in need of serious assistance." He leaned back in his chair, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It was the first time he had truly smiled at her, not just because of a parrot's outburst. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated admiration. "Hughes," he said, the name sounding different, less like an employee and more like a partner. "Cancel my 4 o'clock, and pull up a chair. We have a brand to fix." That invitation, "pull up a chair," changed the entire dynamic of the office. Jennifer was no longer just the assistant. She was the chief chaos coordinator, the in-house translator for Soul, and the only person in the entire company who Vaughn Ashford actually listened to. Their brand-fixing sessions became the stuff of office legend. They'd work late into the night, the vast penthouse office littered with empty takeout containers and scribbled on whiteboards. It was a clash of 2 completely different worlds. Vaughn's approach was methodical, analytical. "We need to analyze the demographic data, Jennifer. What's the target age group's primary media consumption channel?" Jennifer's approach was less scientific. "Forget the data," she'd say, tossing a stress ball at him. "Let's talk about feelings. When a woman puts on these leggings, is she going to the gym, or is she going to war with her own self-doubt? That's what we're selling, not spandex. Resilience." Vaughn would stare at her, a look of baffled admiration on his face. "Resilience isn't a quantifiable metric." "Not everything that counts can be counted, Vaughn," she'd shoot back, quoting a poster she'd once seen in a school library. He found her infuriating, illogical, and absolutely, undeniably brilliant. She didn't think like a CEO. She thought like a human being, and it was a language his company had forgotten how to speak. The campaign they built together was revolutionary. It was bold, authentic, and it was all Hannah. She convinced Vaughn to scrap the supermodels and hire real athletes, a marathon runner who had lost a leg, a single mother who was a champion weightlifter, a ballet dancer who had overcome a career-ending injury. The slogan was simple: Ashford Athletics, made for the comeback. While their professional partnership flourished, the situation with Sir Reginald was escalating from a cute quirk to a full-blown romantic crisis. The parrot, now firmly on Team Jennifer, had apparently decided his mission was to be the feathered harbinger of Vaughn's true feelings. During a tense video conference with the board of directors, Vaughn was laying out the new campaign strategy. "As you can see," Vaughn said, pointing to a projection, "our new approach focuses on narrative authenticity." "Needs you," Sir Reginald squawked from his cage in a perfect, dreamy imitation of Vaughn's sleepy voice. "By my side, always." The entire board fell silent. On the screen, a dozen very serious, very wealthy faces stared in stunned confusion. "What was that, Ashford?" one of the older board members asked. "Did you say you need me by your side?" Vaughn's face turned a shade of crimson. Jennifer had never seen before. "That was an audio feedback issue," he stammered, frantically trying to mute his microphone. "Technical difficulties." He shot a murderous glare at the parrot. Jennifer had to duck under her desk to keep the board from seeing her silent, body-shaking laughter. It got worse. Vaughn started having nightmares. Not about stock market crashes, but about the parrot. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced he had just spent the night dictating a love sonnet to Sir Reginald. He began covering the cage with a thick blanket at night, a move that Sir Reginald considered a declaration of war. The parrot retaliated by learning a new phrase, which he would deploy with devastating precision. Whenever Vaughan was on a particularly important call, Sir Reginald would squawk, in a perfect imitation of Vaughan's own commanding voice, "Release the documents, Arthur." It was a constant, low-grade, hilarious torture. The first major test of their new partnership came during a presentation to the company's top executives. Vaughan and Jennifer were presenting the final campaign concept together. As Jennifer took the stage, a wave of skepticism rippled through the room. She was the assistant, the girl who made the coffee. What could she possibly have to say? She began to speak, and the room went silent. She didn't talk about profits or margins. She talked about stories. She talked about the courage it takes to start over, to fight back, to have a comeback. Her passion was palpable, her vision undeniable. When she finished, one of the older, more notoriously difficult vice presidents, a man named Peterson, spoke up. "It's a very emotional pitch, Miss Hughes. But where are the numbers? Where's the data to support this narrative?" Before Jennifer could answer, Vaughan stepped forward. "The data is on your desk, Peterson," he said, his voice cold as ice. "The data shows our last 3 data-driven campaigns have failed. The data shows our brand is seen as out of touch and inauthentic." He stood next to Jennifer, not in front of her, but beside her. A partner. Miss Hughes is not here to present data. She is here to present the vision. A vision that, I might add, is smarter and more insightful than anything our multi-million-dollar agencies have produced in the last 5 years. He looked around the room, his gaze a clear challenge to anyone who dared to disagree. "This is the new direction of Ashford Athletics. If you are not on board, the door is to your left. Don't let it hit you on the way out." The room was stunned. Vaughan Ashford had never, in his entire career, defended an employee with such fierce public loyalty. He hadn't just endorsed her idea, he had staked his own authority on it. Jennifer just looked at him, her heart swelling with a feeling so warm and so powerful it almost knocked her over. It was a gesture of profound respect of the highest order. He hadn't given her a bonus, he had given her his respect, publicly, unconditionally. After the meeting, which ended with a round of stunned applause, they were walking back to his office. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little shaky. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said, his expression serious. "They needed to understand who's in charge." "And who is in charge?" she teased. "You, or the woman you just called the smartest person in the company?" He stopped walking and turned to her. "That's a good question," he said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. I think we're co-CEOs of this particular venture." They stood there in the middle of the hallway, the usual corporate buzz fading into the background. "So," she said, her voice a little breathless. "Co-CEOs, does that mean I get half of your corner office?" "I have a better idea," he said, his gaze dropping to her lips. "My word," a soft, sleepy voice squawked from the office down the hall. They could hear it faintly through the open door. "Just kiss her, you fool." They both froze, then looked at each other, and burst out laughing. The moment was broken, but in the best possible way. The feathered, blue elephant in the room had just made his opinion known. "Your bird is a menace," she laughed, her face flushed. "He's a romantic," Vaughan corrected, his eyes sparkling, "and a terrible strategist. His timing is atrocious." "I don't know," she said, her smile turning a little shy. "I think his timing is perfect." He took a step closer, the world narrowing to the space between them. "Is it?" he whispered. "It is," she confirmed, and right there in the middle of the 40th floor of a skyscraper, surrounded by the hushed whispers of passing executives, Vaughan Ashford finally followed his parrot's advice. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a secret. It was real, and it was spectacular. It was a spreadsheet, finally, perfectly balancing. That kiss in the hallway rewrote the entire corporate charter of their relationship. They were no longer just boss and assistant or co-CEOs of a marketing campaign. They were something else, something terrifying, exhilarating, and deeply unprofessional. The next morning, the office air was thick with a new, delicious tension. They tried to be normal. They failed spectacularly. "Hughes," Vaughan said, his voice a little too formal as he stood by her desk. "I need you to collate these reports." Right away, Mr. Ashford, she replied, her voice equally stiff. Collating is my passion. He slid the files onto her desk, and his fingers brushed against hers. A jolt of electricity, stronger than the faulty wiring in the coffee machine, shot between them. They both snatched their hands back like they'd been burned. From his cage, Sir Reginald let out a long, low whistle. Awkward, he squawked. Not now, Reggie, Vaughn and Jennifer said in perfect, mortified unison. They spent the rest of the day trying to maintain a 5-foot radius of professional distance, a task made impossible by the fact that they worked in the same room. He'd call her into his office for a meeting, and they'd end up staring at each other over a spreadsheet, completely forgetting what they were supposed to be discussing. The quarterly projections, he'd stammer. Yes, the projections. They are projecting. She'd reply, her mind a complete blank. It was a disaster. A wonderful, giddy, terrifying disaster. Their secret was a bubble of happiness in the sterile, high-stakes world of the 40th floor, and they were both terrified it was going to pop. Their only confidant was the one with feathers. Sir Reginald had become a one-bird Greek chorus, narrating their burgeoning romance with a complete lack of subtlety. Staring again, he'd mutter in Vaughn's voice whenever his owner would gaze at Jennifer for a second too long. Just ask her out, you coward. Vaughn would throw a pen at the cage. I'm managing a multi-billion-dollar corporation, Reggie. Give me a minute. Finally, at the end of the week, Vaughn cracked. He waited until every other employee had left the floor. He walked over to Jennifer's desk, his expression a mixture of desperation and determination. Dinner, he said. A real date, outside of this building, where there are no spreadsheets and no judgmental birds. Jennifer smiled, a slow, brilliant smile. Are you asking me out, Mr. Ashford? I'm begging, he admitted. I can't focus. I spent an hour in a meeting about the Malaysian merger, drawing little hearts on my notepad. It's a crisis. Okay, she laughed. I'll save you from yourself. One date, but my rules. No limos, no 5-star restaurants, and for goodness sake, no harpists. Deal, he said, a look of profound relief on his face. Where are we going? It's a surprise, she said, her eyes twinkling. Wear comfortable shoes and prepare to be humiliated. That Saturday, Vaughn found himself standing outside a bowling alley in Queens. It was loud, smelled of stale popcorn and disinfectant, and was lit with the kind of unflattering fluorescent lights he usually paid millions to avoid. A bowling alley? He asked, looking at the building as if it were an alien spacecraft. This is your idea of a date? It builds character, she said, pulling him inside. And it's a great way to assess a person's true nature. You can't hide your flaws when you're wearing ridiculous shoes and throwing a heavy ball at a bunch of pins. She was right. He was terrible at it. His form was stiff, his aim was atrocious. His first ball went straight into the gutter with a sad, clunking sound. The second ball veered sideways and rolled into the next lane, where a children's birthday party was in full swing. A small child in a princess costume glared at him. My word, he muttered, horrified. I have assaulted a tiny monarch. Jennifer was crying with laughter. You're a menace, Vaughn, a public menace. It's the shoes, he grumbled, pointing to the hideous red and blue clown shoes on his feet. They're ergonomically unsound, and the ball, it's improperly weighted. Right, she said, wiping a tear from her eye. Blame the equipment. A classic CEO move. She picked up her own ball, a bright pink one she had affectionately named the Flamingo, and with a smooth, effortless motion sent it sailing down the lane, knocking down all but one pin. Show off, he grumbled, but he was watching her with a look of pure adoration. He had never seen her like this, so relaxed, so joyful, so unapologetically herself. They played for an hour. He didn't get any better, but he did learn to laugh at himself. He even, to his own surprise, found himself having fun. He was losing, badly, and he didn't care. The only score he was interested in was the number of times he could make her laugh. It was during the final frame that the outside world intruded. Vaughn's phone, which he had reluctantly brought with him, buzzed with an urgent text. It was from Arthur. Sir, there's a problem at the Ethelred launch party. Peterson is here. He's making a scene. Vaughn's good mood evaporated. Peterson was the disgruntled VP he had publicly shut down, a man who now held a serious grudge. The launch party for the comeback campaign was tonight, a major press event. What is it? Jennifer asked, seeing his face fall. It's work, he said, his voice tight. A problem at an event. A disgruntled former employee. Peterson? She guessed. He nodded. He's trying to sabotage the launch. I have to go. Then we go, she said, already taking off her bowling shoes. You didn't think I was going to let you face the wolves alone, did you? We built that campaign together. We're going to defend it together. He looked at her fierce, loyal expression, and felt a wave of love so powerful it almost knocked him over. Get your shoes on, Hughes, he said, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. We have a fire to put out. They arrived at the launch party, a chic, minimalist gallery in Soho, looking like the world's most unlikely superheroes. He was in his rumpled bowling attire. She was in jeans and a bowling alley t-shirt that said, "That's how I roll." They found Peterson, red-faced and slightly drunk, holding court with a group of influential journalists. And the whole campaign is a farce, he was saying loudly. It was designed by his assistant, a nobody. He's lost his mind, I tell you, completely lost it. Peterson, Vaughn's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. I believe you're mistaken. You were fired for being a small-minded, uninspired accountant, not for telling the truth. Peterson whirled around. Ashford, and you brought the secretary here to take notes? Before Vaughn could retort, Jennifer stepped forward. Actually, she said, her voice calm and clear, I'm here to provide a real-time analysis of your brand's current trajectory. And from where I'm standing, it's nose-diving faster than a bowling ball in the wrong lane. The journalists, smelling blood, turned their full attention to her. The comeback campaign is about one thing, Mr. Peterson, she continued, her voice ringing with the same passion she had shown in the boardroom. It's about the power of a second story. It's about celebrating the strength it takes to get back up after you've been knocked down, something you clearly know nothing about. She looked around at the journalists. Vaughn Ashford didn't just approve this campaign. He is this campaign. He's a man who has had his own comeback, and he chose to build it not on empty trends but on something real, on talent, and on courage. She looked at Vaughn, a proud, fierce smile on her face. And I am prouder than I can say to be the assistant who helped him find his voice. The room was silent. Peterson looked like he had been slapped. Then, one of the journalists, the most influential fashion critic in the city, started to clap. Slowly at first, then more enthusiastically. The rest of the room joined in. Peterson, utterly defeated, slunk away into the crowd. Vaughn just stared at Jennifer, his heart in his eyes. She hadn't just defended the campaign. She had defended him. She had told their story, their real, messy, beautiful story, without giving away a single secret. He walked over to her, ignoring the applause, the cameras, the entire world. You are the most incredible woman I have ever met, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I know, she said, a shaky but brilliant smile on her face. You've mentioned it. I'm going to keep mentioning it, he promised. For the rest of my life. He leaned in and kissed her, right there in the middle of the party, under the bright lights and the flashing cameras. He didn't care who saw. He wanted the world to see. He wanted them to see the brilliant, brave, beautiful woman who was his partner, his fixer-upper, his entire balanced spreadsheet. The kiss at the launch party didn't just make headlines, it sent a seismic shockwave through the corporate culture of Ashford athletics. When Jennifer walked into the office on Monday morning, the change was immediate and hilarious. Executives who used to barely acknowledge her existence now practically tripped over themselves to hold the door open. People stopped talking when she entered the break room. She even found a freshly baked muffin on her desk, left by a terrified-looking junior accountant who simply nodded at her, wide-eyed, and then scurried away. This is weird, she whispered to Vaughn as he handed her a coffee. A perfect one, this time. I feel like I've been promoted to mob boss. Peterson from accounting just offered me his firstborn son as a tribute. He's just showing respect to his new queen, Vaughn said, a smug grin on his face. He leaned in and kissed her, right there in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Get used to it. Sir, ma'am? A timid voice interrupted. It was Arthur, holding a tablet and looking deeply uncomfortable. Your 9 o'clock is here. The Danish investors. Right, Vaughn said, straightening his tie. Jennifer, you're with me. What? She said. I'm not prepared. I haven't even read the preliminary. You don't need to prepare, he said, taking her hand. You're my secret weapon. Just sit there and look brilliant. It comes naturally to you. The meeting was a surreal experience. Jennifer sat by Vaughn's side, trying to look professional, while a group of very serious Danish men discussed profit margins. Halfway through, Vaughn turned to her. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on the Q3 growth projections? Jennifer froze. 20 pairs of eyes turned to her. She had no idea what the Q3 growth projections were. She opened her mouth, panic setting in. Needs a better story, Sir Reginald squawked from his cage in the corner, saving her. More courage. The Danish investors stared at the parrot. My avian consultant is correct, Vaughn said, not missing a beat. The numbers are fine, but the story is weak. We need more courage. He looked at Jennifer, a silent thank you in his eyes. Exactly, Jennifer said, finding her footing. The story lacks courage. We need to be bolder, more Danish. The investors, flattered and confused, nodded in agreement. They spent the next few weeks as the company's new power couple. It was a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and long, exhilarating nights spent reinventing a global brand. They were a perfect team. He was the unstoppable force. She was the immovable object of common sense. But as much as she was enjoying her new role, she missed her old life. She missed the quiet, the normalcy. I need a break, she announced one Friday evening, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. Good idea, Vaughn said. I'll have the jet fueled. Paris, or maybe that private island I bought last year? It has excellent Wi-Fi. No, she said, shaking her head. No jets, no islands. I want a real weekend, my kind of weekend. Define your kind of weekend, he said, looking intrigued. It involves cheap beer, a questionable karaoke bar, and my terrifyingly competitive best friends, she said with a grin. Game night. Tomorrow. My place. You in, Ashford? He looked genuinely terrified. Karaoke? With other people? You run a multi-billion-dollar empire, Vaughn. You can handle a tone-deaf rendition of Total Eclipse of the Heart. He sighed, a look of grim determination on his face. Fine, but I'm bringing my own microphone. A German one, with superior audio fidelity. That Saturday, Vaughn Ashford, dressed in what he clearly thought was a casual outfit, a cashmere sweater that cost more than her rent and jeans that looked like they had been ironed, walked into a loud, chaotic game night at Jennifer's apartment. Her friends, a motley crew of nurses, teachers, and one struggling artist, stared at him as if a unicorn had just walked in and asked for a beer. So you're the guy. Her best friend, a sharp-witted ER doctor named Chloe, said, looking him up and down. The one who's been distracting our Jenny from her duties as my designated charades partner. I'm the guy, Vaughn said, extending a hand. A pleasure to meet you. I've heard things. Good, Chloe said, shaking his hand firmly. Then you know I don't mess around. You break her heart, I break your legs. Metaphorically, mostly. The evening was a trial by fire. He was terrible at charades. Is it a hostile takeover? A leveraged buyout? He was even worse at Pictionary. That's not a dog, Vaughn, that's a spreadsheet. But he was a surprisingly good sport. He laughed at his own incompetence, he complimented the terrible snacks, and he listened, genuinely fascinated, as Jennifer's friends told stories about their messy, normal, wonderful lives. Later in the evening, they ended up in the corner of the kitchen, away from the noise of a particularly brutal game of Monopoly. You survived, Jennifer said, handing him a beer. Barely, he said, but he was smiling. Your friends are intense. Chloe questioned me about my 5-year plan. I think she was looking for weaknesses in my emotional portfolio. That's just how she says hello, Jennifer laughed. She leaned against the counter, looking at him. He looked happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. Thank you for coming. I know this isn't your world. It is now, he said, his voice soft. He reached out, his hand gently tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. Any world you're in, Jennifer, that's my world. The moment was soft, intimate, and perfect. Just kiss her, you fool, a voice squawked from the living room. They both jumped. Sir Reginald was sitting on his portable perch, which Vaughn had insisted on bringing, looking at them with an expectant air. The entire room went silent. Did that bird just talk? Chloe asked, her eyes wide. No, Vaughn and Jennifer said in perfect panicked unison. He said, kiss her. Chloe's boyfriend, a quiet teacher named Ben, pointed out. Vaughn shot a murderous glare at the parrot. He's practicing his vocabulary for his speech therapy. Sir Reginald, seizing the spotlight, puffed up his chest. Her eyes, he declared to the silent room. Like honey, my beautiful, brilliant fixer-upper. The room erupted. Chloe shrieked with laughter. Ben choked on his beer. Jennifer buried her face in her hands. I'm going to kill that bird. Get in line, Vaughn muttered, his face the color of a ripe tomato. The secret was out, or at least the weirdest, most specific part of it was. Later that night, after her friends had finally left, still laughing, Jennifer found Vaughn on the small balcony, looking out at the city lights. So, she said, coming up behind him, my beautiful, brilliant fixer-upper, huh? He groaned without turning around. I'm going to donate him to a very distant, very quiet monastery. No, you're not, she said, wrapping her arms around his waist. He's our matchmaker. A very loud, very embarrassing matchmaker. She rested her cheek against his back. It's sweet, you know, the things you say. He finally turned in her arms to face her. It's mortifying, he said, but he was smiling. He looked down at her, his expression turning serious. But he's right, about the brilliant part anyway, and the beautiful part. And the fixer-upper part, she asked, a playful glint in her eye. Especially that part, he murmured, leaning in to kiss her. You fixed me, Jennifer Hughes. You and your ridiculous, wonderful karaoke-singing friends? I haven't even made you sing yet, she said against his lips. Don't push your luck, he laughed, and kissed her again. A deep, loving kiss that tasted of cheap beer, friendship, and the promise of a lifetime of happy, chaotic, and very, very loud game nights. After the great game night revelation, as Jennifer's friends now called it, the pretense of a purely professional relationship at the office evaporated. Not that they were unprofessional, but the air between them was now filled with a low, happy hum of shared secrets and inside jokes. Vaughn, for his part, had leaned into his new role as the fixer-upper. He found he rather liked it. It was a vast improvement over Ice King. He started leaving little notes on her desk, not memos, but silly cartoons he'd doodled during boring meetings. One was a drawing of Sir Reginald wearing a tiny therapist's tweed jacket. Another was a very detailed, very inaccurate diagram of an emotionally supportive coffee machine. Jennifer would just shake her head, a warm, fond smile on her face. The grumpy, intimidating billionaire she had met on her first day was gone, replaced by this brilliant, dorky, surprisingly sweet man who was terrible at charades. Their partnership in business was seamless. The comeback campaign was a massive success, and they moved on to their next project, a complete overhaul of the Ashford Foundation, Vaughn's family charity. It's a dinosaur, Vaughn complained, flipping through the foundation's portfolio. We host one stuffy gala a year, give a massive check to the opera, and call it a day. It's my mother's idea of charity, all glitter, no gold. So what's the story you want to tell? Jennifer asked, pulling up a chair. I want to build things, he said, his eyes passionate. Like my grandfather did. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a creator. He started this foundation to support young architects and engineers, people who build things. My father? He changed the mission. He preferred funding things that would get his name on a plaque. He sighed, a sound of deep, old frustration. There was one project, my grandfather's passion project, the Ashford Conservatory, a free school of music and arts for underprivileged kids. He had the land, the plans, everything. But after he passed, my father sold the land to a developer who built a parking garage. He said a school for sentimental nonsense was a poor investment. Jennifer listened, her heart aching for the boy he must have been, the boy who played the cello and had his dreams dismissed as a bad investment. Is the land still a parking garage? She asked softly. Yes, he said, his voice bitter. A very profitable, very ugly parking garage. I've tried to buy it back for years. The owner is a stubborn old coot named Henderson who hates my family. He refuses to sell. At any price. Henderson? Jennifer's eyes widened. Wait, as in Frank Henderson? You know him? Vaughn asked, surprised. I know his grandson, she said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across her face. Little Timmy Henderson, he's 7. I take care of him sometimes in the pediatric ward. He has asthma, and he's the sweetest kid you'll ever meet, and he loves to draw. Vaughn stared at her. What are you thinking, Hughes? I can see the gears turning in that terrifyingly brilliant mind of yours. I'm thinking, she said, her eyes dancing with a familiar, mischievous light, that you've been trying to solve this problem like a CEO. With money and lawyers. But this isn't a business problem, Vaughn. It's a human problem, and human problems require a human solution. The following Saturday, Vaughn did not wear a suit. He wore jeans and a simple Henley. He was standing in a brightly lit, slightly chaotic children's art classroom at the local community center, and he was terrified. "This is your plan?" he whispered to Jennifer. "You want me to win over a stubborn old man by finger painting?" "It's a multi-pronged strategy," she whispered back, handing him a small plastic apron. Phase 1. Demonstrate community engagement. Phase 2. Establish a personal connection with the target's primary emotional leverage point, his grandson. Phase 3. Adorable, colorful chaos. She was volunteering for the center's Family Art Day, and she had dragged him along as her assistant. "I don't do chaos," he grumbled, tying the apron, which was far too small for him. "I know," she grinned. "That's why this is going to be so much fun." For the next hour, Vaughn was in a war zone of glitter, glue, and tiny, sticky hands. He, a man who commanded an empire, was being bossed around by a 7-year-old named Timmy Henderson. "No, not like that," Timmy would command, grabbing a paintbrush from Vaughn's hand. "You have to make the sun happy. Yours looks grumpy." Vaughn looked at his painting. The sun did look grumpy. It looked like it was about to fire someone. He was clumsy. He was awkward. He got more paint on himself than on the canvas. But as he watched Jennifer, kneeling on the floor, laughing as a little girl painted her face like a cat, he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the stuffy, overheated classroom. This was her world. This was her superpower. She wasn't just a brilliant designer. She was a creator of joy. At the end of the class, a stooped, elderly man with a cane and a permanently sour expression came to pick up Timmy. "Frank Henderson, Grandpa," Timmy yelled, running over and showing him his painting. "Look, we painted a grumpy sun." Henderson looked at the painting, then his gaze fell on Vaughn, who was trying to scrub purple paint off his hands. "You," Henderson grunted, his eyes narrowing. "You're a Huntington, or an Ashford. I can never keep you people straight. You're the one whose father stole my father's company in '82. "Ashford," Vaughn corrected, standing up and extending a hand. "And my father maintains it was a fair market acquisition." Henderson just glared at his hand and didn't take it. "Mr. Ashford was helping us today, Grandpa," Timmy said. "He's not very good at painting, but he's good at telling stories. He told us about a big bird who bosses him around." "A bird?" Henderson looked even more confused. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Henderson," Vaughn said, his voice polite but firm. "Your grandson is a gifted artist. He has a real eye for emotional resonance." He and Jennifer left the community center, walking out into the cool afternoon air. "Well," Vaughn said, picking a piece of glitter out of his hair, "that was a complete disaster. He hates me more than ever." "Was it?" Jennifer asked, a secret smile on her lips. "I don't know. For a man who hates you, he sure asked a lot of questions about you after you left." "He did?" She said. "He asked Timmy if the rich man was nice, and Timmy told him you were okay for a guy who can't draw a sun." Vaughn stopped walking. "He did?" "He did," she confirmed. "You didn't try to buy him, Vaughn. You didn't try to intimidate him. You just showed up. You let his grandson paint on your expensive shoes. You were just a man helping out." She reached up and wiped a smudge of purple paint from his cheek. "That's a good look on you, by the way. Very avant-garde." He looked at her, at the paint on her own face, at the genuine, uncomplicated happiness in her eyes, and knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he would spend the rest of his life covered in glitter and paint if it meant he could keep seeing that smile. The next week, Vaughn got a call. It was from Frank Henderson. "Ashford," the old man grunted. "My grandson won't shut up about you, or your bird. I'm having dinner at my club tonight, 8 o'clock. Be there, and wear a tie." He hung up before Vaughn could respond. Vaughn just stared at the phone, a slow, stunned smile spreading across his face. He had just been summoned, and for the first time in his life, it wasn't an order. It was an invitation. The Century Club was the kind of place where the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and the waiters looked like they had been personally offended by your existence. It was dark, smelled of old leather and older money, and was the last place Jennifer Hughes ever expected to be on a Tuesday night. "Remember," Vaughn whispered to her as they walked in, looking devastatingly handsome in a tie that perfectly matched the color of Sir Reginald's feathers. Henderson is old school. He respects strength and silence. Don't smile too much. It unnerves him. I'm here for moral support, Jennifer whispered back, adjusting her dress. And to kick you under the table if you start speaking in corporate acronyms. Frank Henderson was waiting for them at a corner table, looking like a gargoyle carved out of granite. He didn't stand up, he just gestured to the empty chairs. Ashford, he grunted, and the assistant. Jennifer, she corrected pleasantly, sitting down. The assistant who knows how to paint a happy sun. Henderson's lip twitched. It might have been a smile or indigestion. My grandson talks about you, says you're fun. I don't trust fun people. Neither do I, Vaughn said, sitting down and unfolding his napkin with military precision. They're usually hiding something. Shall we order? The dinner was a masterclass in tension. Henderson grilled Vaughn about profit margins, market volatility, and his father's past business dealings. Vaughn answered every question with a calm, steel-trap precision that was impressive, but cold. Jennifer watched them, feeling like she was watching two stags locking horns. They were speaking the same language, but they weren't communicating. Finally, Henderson put down his fork. Enough dancing, Ashford. You want my parking garage. I've told you no for 5 years. Why should tonight be any different? Because you finger-painted with a 7-year-old? Vaughn took a sip of water. He looked at Jennifer. She gave him a small, encouraging nod. Be human, her eyes said. Vaughn turned back to Henderson. I don't want your parking garage, Frank. I want your legacy. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a rolled-up piece of paper. It wasn't a contract. It was Timmy's painting from the art class, the one with the grumpy son. He smoothed it out on the pristine white tablecloth. Your grandson drew this, Vaughn said. He told me he wants to be an artist, like his great-grandfather. Your father. Henderson stared at the drawing, his hard expression wavering for the first time. My father was a dreamer. It got him nowhere. It got him a son who built an empire, Vaughn countered softly, but it also left a hole. A hole where the music used to be. My grandfather wanted to build a conservatory on that land. Your father wanted to build a gallery. They were rivals, yes, but they were both men who understood that a city without art is just concrete. Vaughn leaned forward. I'm not offering you money, Frank. I'm offering you a partnership. The Henderson-Ashford Conservatory, a place where Timmy and kids like him can learn to paint sons that aren't grumpy. A place where your name isn't just on a parking ticket, but on the future. The table was silent. The waiter hovered nervously with the dessert menu. Henderson looked at the drawing. He traced the wobbly lines of the sun with a trembling finger. He looked at Vaughn, really looked at him, for the first time in decades. You sound like him, Henderson whispered. Your grandfather. He was a stubborn old mule, too. It runs in the family, Vaughn said with a small smile. Henderson sat back, a heavy sigh escaping him. A conservatory, with my name first? Alphabetical order, Vaughn negotiated instantly. Ashford Henderson. Henderson Ashford, Frank countered. And I want a dedicated studio for watercolors. Timmy likes watercolors. Done, Vaughn said, extending his hand. Henderson shook it. The grip was firm. The deal was made, not with lawyers, but with a child's drawing and a shared memory. Well, Henderson said, signaling the waiter. I suppose we should celebrate. Do you eat cake, Ashford? Or is that too frivolous for you? I love cake, Vaughn said, especially if it has structural integrity. Jennifer let out a laugh she had been holding in for an hour. You did good, she whispered to Vaughn as they walked out of the club later that night, the contract scribbled on a napkin safely in his pocket. I had a good coach, he said, looking down at her. The streetlights reflected in his eyes, making them look warm and open. I would have offered him double the market value and lost. You taught me to offer him what actually mattered. That's because I'm brilliant, she teased. You are, he agreed, his voice serious. You're brilliant and kind and essential. He stopped walking. They were standing in front of a fountain, the water dancing in the moonlight. Jennifer, he said, taking her hand, I've spent my whole life building walls, protecting the assets, but lately I feel like the only asset that really matters is standing right in front of me. Her breath hitched. This was it, the moment. Are you representing a merger? She asked, her voice trembling slightly, trying to keep it light. I'm proposing a hostile takeover of your heart, he murmured, stepping closer. Sir? A frantic voice shouted from a car that had just pulled up to the curb. It was Arthur. He looked pale and terrified. "Arthur?" Vaughn asked, not letting go of Jennifer's hand. "This better be a national emergency." "It's worse, sir," Arthur gasped, leaning out the window. "It's your mother. She's at the office, with the board, and she brought the bird." Vaughn froze. "She brought Sir Reginald?" "She found your journal, sir. The dream journal, the one you keep by your bed." Arthur looked like he wanted to vanish. "She's reading it, to the board, and the parrot is reenacting it." Vaughn went white. Jennifer's eyes went wide. "The dream journal?" Jennifer whispered. "The one where you write down everything?" "Everything," Vaughn groaned, covering his face with his free hand, "including the poem about your stapler usage." "You wrote a poem about my stapler usage?" "It was a metaphor for efficiency," he cried. "We have to go," Arthur urged. "She's threatening to commit you, sir. She thinks you've lost your mind." Vaughn looked at Jennifer. "I have to stop her, before she reads the entry about the photocopier incident." "There was a photocopier incident?" Jennifer asked, intrigued and horrified. "Go," she said, pushing him toward the car. "Go save your dignity. I'll meet you there." "No," he said, grabbing her hand again. "We go together. If I'm going down, I'm going down with my co-CEO." He pulled her into the car. "To the tower, Arthur, and step on it." As the car sped off, Jennifer couldn't help but laugh. It was a disaster. A catastrophe, a complete corporate meltdown, and she wouldn't have missed it for the world. She was going to save the man she loved from his own mother and a poetic parrot. It was just another Tuesday at Ashford Enterprises. The engagement of Vaughn Ashford and Jennifer Hughes was the talk of the city, mostly because no one could quite believe it. The tabloids ran headlines like "The Ice King melts" and "From assistant to irreplaceable." But inside the Ashford penthouse, the only headline that mattered was "Sir Reginald disapproves of the wedding cake." "He hissed at the lemon sponge," Jennifer said, collapsing onto the sofa after a disastrous tasting session. "He actually hissed. I didn't know birds could hiss." "He's a purist," Vaughn said, unbuttoning his collar and sitting next to her. "He prefers almond or mango." "It's our wedding, Vaughn, not a parrot's birthday party." "Try telling him that." Vaughn laughed, pulling her closer. "He thinks he's the ring bearer." "He is absolutely not the ring bearer," Jennifer said firmly. "He'll probably eat the rings, or throw them at the officiant." The wedding planning was a chaotic, joyful mess. Vaughn wanted to hire the London Symphony Orchestra. Jennifer wanted a DJ who played 80s power ballads. They compromised on a jazz trio that knew how to play "Don't Stop Believing." But the biggest hurdle wasn't the cake or the music. It was Vaughn's mother. Mrs. Ashford, a woman who considered smiling to be a sign of weakness, had requested a private meeting with Jennifer. "She's going to eat me alive," Jennifer whispered to Vaughn as they stood outside the drawing room of the Ashford estate. "She's toothless," Vaughn assured her. "Figuratively, her dentist is excellent. Just be yourself. She respects strength." Jennifer walked in. Mrs. Ashford was sitting by the fire, looking like a queen in exile. "Miss Hughes," she said, her voice cool. "Sit." Jennifer sat. She didn't fidget. She didn't apologize. She just looked at the formidable matriarch with a calm, steady gaze. "My son tells me you are responsible for his recent emotional awakening," Mrs. Ashford said, making emotional awakening sound like a tropical disease. "I think Vaughn woke himself up," Jennifer corrected gently. "I just made the coffee." Mrs. Ashford stared at her for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth twitched. "You have a spine. Good. He needs that. His father had too much pride and not enough spine. You might actually be good for him." It wasn't a hug. It wasn't a warm welcome. But in the Ashford dictionary, it was practically a sonnet. The wedding day arrived with a forecast of clear skies and zero chance of parrot-related disasters. They chose to get married on the rooftop of the new Ashford Foundation building, the very parking garage Vaughn had bought back from Henderson, now transformed into a breathtaking garden and art center for kids. It was a symbol of everything they believed in, taking something cold and ugly and turning it into something beautiful and full of life. Jennifer wore a dress that was simple, elegant, and entirely her own design. Vaughn wore a suit that fit him perfectly, but for the first time, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a groom. As Jennifer walked down the aisle, the jazz trio playing a soft, swinging version of Every Breath You Take. She looked at the faces around her. Her friends, his mother, wearing a hat that could block satellite signals, Henderson and Timmy, and Arthur, who was weeping openly into a handkerchief. And there, standing next to Vaughn, perched on a velvet-covered stand, was Sir Reginald. He was wearing a tiny, custom-made tuxedo vest. "I thought we agreed no parrot," Jennifer whispered as she reached the altar. "He threatened a hunger strike," Vaughn whispered back, his eyes shining with love. "And he promised to behave." The ceremony was perfect. They wrote their own vows. Vaughn promised to always listen to her, to never put business before their story, and to try, really try, to like charades. Jennifer promised to be his partner, his sounding board, and to always keep the mango supply stocked. When the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, the entire rooftop held its breath, looking at the bird. Sir Reginald preened his feathers, looked at the crowd, and squawked, in a perfect imitation of Vaughn's most commanding voice, "Proceed." The crowd erupted in laughter. Vaughn shook his head, but he was grinning. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said. "You may kiss the bride." Vaughn didn't hesitate. He kissed her with a passion and a tenderness that made the rest of the world fade away. It was a kiss that sealed their partnership, their friendship, and their love. The reception was a party for the ages. Henderson danced with Mrs. Ashford, a sight that nearly caused Arthur to faint. Timmy drew portraits of the guests on napkins. And Vaughn and Jennifer danced under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved and the future they were building together. Late that night, they stood on the edge of the rooftop, looking out at the city. "We did it," Jennifer said, resting her head on his shoulder. "We did," Vaughn agreed. "And we didn't even have to fire anyone." "The night is young," she teased. He laughed, wrapping his arms around her. "You know, I was thinking about our next project." "Oh," she asked. "Another rebranding?" "No," he said softly. "I was thinking about a honeymoon, somewhere quiet, somewhere with no cell service, just you, me, and maybe a mango or two." "Sounds perfect," she said. And, he added, a mischievous glint in his eye, "I was thinking we could bring the bird." Jennifer pulled back, horrified. "Vaughn!" "Kidding," he laughed, kissing her nose. "Reggie stays with Arthur. He's already packed his bags." She smiled, leaning into him. "You're a menace, Vaughn Ashford." "I'm a work in progress," he corrected. "But I have the best project manager in the world." He kissed her again, a slow, sweet promise of a lifetime of laughter, challenges, and love. What did you think of the story of Vaughn and Jennifer? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey from the boardroom to the rooftop? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us until the very end, who believes that even the coldest hearts can be warmed by the right person, and maybe a parrot, please comment Fixer-Upper. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will change the world. 2 years into their marriage, Vaughn and Jennifer had mastered the art of high-stakes domesticity. Vaughn still tried to optimize their grocery shopping with spreadsheets, and Jennifer still vetoed his attempts to hire a professional organizer for her sock drawer. But the biggest disruption to their carefully calibrated chaos arrived on a Tuesday morning. Jennifer was in the kitchen, staring at a piece of plastic on the counter. Vaughn walked in, already dressed for a board meeting, reviewing a merger on his tablet. "Good morning," he said, kissing her cheek. "Did you see the memo about the new espresso beans? I've sourced a sustainable farm in Colombia. The flavor profile is—" "Vaughn," she interrupted, her voice oddly quiet. He stopped, sensing the shift in the air. "What is it? Is it the toaster? Did it break again?" "No," she said, turning to face him. She held up the pregnancy test. "It's a merger, a non-negotiable 9-month merger." Vaughn stared at the test. He blinked. He looked at her. He looked back at the test. For a man who could calculate risk ratios in his sleep, his brain had completely short-circuited. "Is that a positive indicator?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It's a baby, Vaughn," she laughed, tears in her eyes. "We're having a baby." The tablet fell from his hands and clattered to the floor. He didn't even notice. A slow, terrified, brilliant smile spread across his face. "A baby," he whispered, "a tiny human, with no operational manual." "We'll figure it out," she said, hugging him. "I need to prepare." he said, pulling back, his eyes wide with sudden panic. I need to read books, all the books. I need to child-proof the penthouse. I need to interview nannies. I need to negotiate a peace treaty with the parrot. Vaughn, relax. We have months. Months isn't enough time to optimize a nursery, he exclaimed, already pacing. The crib needs to have structural integrity. The mobile needs to be educational. What if the baby doesn't like my singing? Nobody likes your singing, honey, she reminded him gently. But the baby won't care. The next 9 months were a comedy of errors. Vaughn approached fatherhood like a hostile takeover. He bought every gadget on the market. He interviewed pediatricians with the intensity of a grand inquisitor. He even tried to teach Sir Reginald to say "hush, little baby," but the parrot preferred to scream "project deadline" at random intervals. Sir Reginald, for his part, was deeply suspicious of the growing bump. He would stare at Jennifer's stomach and mutter, "Unauthorized personnel," in Vaughn's voice. When the day finally came, Vaughn was a wreck. He drove to the hospital at 10 miles an hour, terrified of every pothole. He tried to give the doctors a PowerPoint presentation on his birth plan. "Mr. Ashford," the doctor said patiently, "please sit down. You're hyperventilating." "I am practicing rhythmic breathing," he wheezed into a paper bag. But when their daughter, a tiny screaming bundle of fury named Leo, short for Eleanor, was placed in his arms, the panic vanished. The world stopped. Vaughn looked down at her tiny fingers and her fierce, squinting eyes, and he fell in love all over again. "Hello," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your dad. I'm a bit of a mess, but your mom is amazing, and we have a parrot." Leo stopped crying and blinked at him. "She likes me," he said, looking at Jennifer with wonder. "She didn't file a complaint." Bringing Leo home was the start of a new adventure. Sir Reginald took one look at the baby and immediately declared himself her personal bodyguard. He would perch on the edge of her crib and squawk at anyone who came too close, including Vaughn. "Back off, Suit," the bird would yell. "I live here," Vaughn would argue. "I pay the mortgage." As Leo grew, so did their happiness. Vaughn learned to change diapers with military precision. He learned that sleep was a luxury, not a right. And he learned that the most important meeting of his day wasn't with the board, but with a toddler who wanted to have a tea party with a stuffed bear and a grumpy parrot. One afternoon, Jennifer found Vaughn in the living room. He was sitting on the floor, wearing a tiara, while Leo tried to put a tutu on Sir Reginald, who was tolerating it with surprising grace. "You look majestic," Jennifer said, leaning against the doorframe. Vaughn looked up, grinning. "I'm a princess," he informed her gravely, "and Reggie is my noble steed." "I thought he was a fixer-upper," she teased. "He's multi-talented," Vaughn said. He watched his daughter laugh, a sound that filled the penthouse with pure light. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think my legacy was the buildings, the company. And now?" "Now," he said, adjusting his tiara, "I know my legacy is this, the tea parties, the chaos, the noise." Jennifer sat down next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's a good legacy, Vaughn." "It's the best," he agreed. He leaned in to kiss her, careful not to disturb his tiara. It was a sweet, tired, happy kiss. "Ew," Leo giggled. "Gross," Sir Reginald squawked. Vaughn and Jennifer laughed, surrounded by their family, their noise, and their love. They had built a world that was messy, loud, and absolutely perfect, and they wouldn't trade it for all the quiet penthouses in the world. 10 years later, the Ashford name meant something very different in New York City. It wasn't associated with cold skyscrapers or ruthless mergers anymore. It was associated with gardens on rooftops, art schools in old garages, and a scholarship fund for kids who dared to dream bigger than their circumstances. Vaughn and Jennifer stood in the center of the newly opened Reginald wing of the Ashford Conservatory. It was a chaotic, colorful space dedicated to storytelling and theater arts. "I still can't believe you named a wing after the bird," Jennifer said, shaking her head as she watched a group of teenagers rehearsing a play. "He's a muse," Vaughn said, adjusting his glasses. He had started wearing them recently, and Jennifer thought they made him look dashingly professorial. And besides, he threatened to leak my old poetry if I didn't. "He's 35 years old, Vaughn. He's not leaking anything. He's mostly just napping and demanding mangoes." "He's biding his time," Vaughn insisted. Their daughter Leo, now a fierce and brilliant 12-year-old with her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, ran up to them. She was holding a clipboard. "Dad," she said, tapping her pen against the paper, "the lighting cues for the second act are inefficient. The transition takes 4 seconds too long. It ruins the narrative flow." Vaughn looked at Jennifer. "She sounds like me. Should I be worried?" "Terrified," Jennifer confirmed, beaming. "Leo," Vaughn said, crouching down to her level, "inefficiency isn't always bad. Sometimes the pause is where the magic happens. It gives the audience a moment to breathe, to feel." Leo frowned, considering this. "Like a dramatic pause?" "Exactly," Vaughn said. "Like a breath before a kiss, or a silence before a song. Don't rush the story, Leo. Let it unfold." Leo nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll extend the cue, but I'm cutting the fog machine budget. It's excessive." "That's my girl." Vaughn laughed, standing up. Later that evening, they hosted a small dinner at their penthouse. It wasn't a gala. It was just family. Henderson, now frail but still sharp as a tack, was arguing with Arthur about the best vintage of tea. Chloe and Ben were there, their own kids running around with Leo. And in the corner, in a cage that looked more like a palace, sat Sir Reginald. He was old now, his feathers a little less vibrant, but his eyes were still bright with mischief. Vaughn walked over to him with a slice of mango. "Here you go, you old tyrant," he murmured. Sir Reginald took the fruit delicately. Then he cocked his head and looked at Vaughn. "Happy," the bird squawked, in a voice that was no longer an imitation but entirely his own scratchy baritone. "Happy, Vaughn." Vaughn froze. He looked at the bird, then across the room at Jennifer, who was laughing at something Henderson had said. She looked up, caught his eye, and smiled, that warm, brilliant smile that had changed his entire world. "Yes," Vaughn whispered to the bird. "Happy, Vaughn." He walked over to his wife, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "What were you and the bird conspiring about?" she asked, leaning back into him. "Just reviewing the quarterly happiness report," he said, kissing her temple. "Profits are up, morale is at an all-time high." "And the forecast?" "Sunny," he said, "with 100% chance of mangoes." They stood there, surrounded by the noise and the love of the family they had built. A family that started with a grumpy billionaire, a brave assistant, and a parrot who couldn't keep a secret. Vaughn looked at his reflection in the window. He didn't see the Ice King anymore. He saw a man who had been broken and put back together with gold. He saw a fixer-upper who had finally, truly found his home. And as the laughter of his daughter filled the room, he knew that this was the only story he ever wanted to tell. What did you think of the story of Vaughn, Jennifer, and Sir Reginald? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey from office rivals to soulmates? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us until the very end, who believes that sometimes the most broken things can become the most beautiful, please comment, fixer-upper. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will change the world.